My name is Peter Wheeler and I'm the Life Sciences Regional Sector Specialist International Trade Advisor for UKTI Yorkshire. A very long, very fancy job title. I'll try and explain what it means as we go on through the presentation. But I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about exporting in general and why it is good for a company to export, why it is beneficial for our economy for businesses to be engaged in international trade in general. The first point I think is fairly obvious. If you're engaged in international trade, your company is more likely to grow and more likely to increase its turnover. I think that's fairly standard, fairly predictable. It's also more likely to increase its profitability. You're doing more business, you're gaining greater economies of scale. You're more profitable if you're trading internationally and increasing your turnover. You can also spread your risk by diversifying into different international markets. If you're completely reliant just on the UK, if the UK goes through a recession, as many companies saw 4 or 5 years ago, that can cause quite significant problems for your business. So by having income streams from different international markets, you're diversifying your risk against that happening again, and hopefully increasing the chances of your business sustaining in the future. Obviously your profile also increases if you're selling things internationally. Your brand is out there in more countries, in more places, and you're being exposed to more people, and that can correspondingly increase the value of your business. And like I said, you're also more competitive. You can achieve greater economies of scale in line with the increased turnover. The product lifespan is an interesting point. You may have a product that's reached the end of its life cycle in the UK market. It's grown, it's gone through maturity, and it's now declining again. You may find other international markets 5-10 years behind the UK, so you can take that exact same product to a different market where it's very much in its growing stages, and you can usually make that process, you can accelerate it somewhat because you've been through it all and you've done it once already. They're just some statistics. These are all properly researched by an organisation called OMB Research on behalf of UK Trade and Investment, and you can see that companies that export, they tend to be more successful. Now, in my role as an international trade advisor, one of the things I get asked most commonly is where should we export? Where do we begin? Which markets do we target? Looking at the markets we currently export to as a country, it's still amazing to look at these numbers and see that we export more to Ireland than we do to China, more to Belgium than we do to China, which isn't really representative of the opportunities existing in the world today, but is probably more representative of the markets we're more familiar with, more comfortable in dealing with. And the States is still the top by a significant distance. It's still our top trading partner. But if you look at our forecasts for the future, you can see this is going to be changing. The yellow is Europe, so the percentage of our exports going to Europe is going to shrink, and the proportion of our exports going to Asia is going to grow, the Middle East is going to grow, and South America is going to grow, and North America is going to remain about the same as it has done. That is obviously representative of where the demand is coming from, where the opportunities are. I know we spoke about Nigeria earlier, and yeah, that's the type of market that we're going to see an increase in exports to, as opposed to some of these markets, places like Italy and Spain and France and the Netherlands. Now, the key question people often ask is, how can I export to these markets? I don't know, do you guys trade internationally already? I know you have some, you guys do, don't you, Sunrise? Yeah. Which markets do you sell into at the moment? Yeah, it's everywhere, yeah. What UK Trade and Investment is quite an easy organisation to explain at a very top level. It's the UK government body responsible for doing two things: helping companies trade more, that means sell more stuff overseas, and helping inward investment flow into the UK. I work just on the trade side of things. So I work with companies to help them develop their international trade strategies, find new markets, and increase their business overseas. And UKTI has around 400 people working around the UK, helping companies do this. I'm from a team of advisors based in Yorkshire. I work as a specialist international trade advisor focusing just on healthcare companies. So companies like yourselves looking to sell healthcare products and healthcare devices. It's obviously a fairly niche market. It's very regulated. The demographics of the world place some unique demands on healthcare manufacturers as well. So it needs specialist advisors. And there's equivalents to me in every other region of the UK. There are life sciences specific international trade advisors in other UK regions as well. Overall, UKTI has more than 1,200 staff around the world. So we have 400 people across the regions in the UK, a group of people working centrally in London, but then a huge mass of people working overseas. So if we use an example, we have our representative from France here with us today. Julie works for the British Embassy in Lyon, in France, and helps British companies access the French market. So if you have market access problems, you're looking for distributors, you're looking to go to events, any of that type of thing, the posts overseas can help you with those inquiries. And almost all of our advisors come from the private sector as well. We're not largely civil servants. I've worked for healthcare companies since coming from university, really, before I moved into UKTI. Another colleague I have working in the team in Yorkshire, he's worked for healthcare manufacturers in an exporting role. My role was more in international marketing. We tend to be business people. We're not just civil servants and full-time advisors, if you like. So if you look at where UKTI has a presence in the world, it's fairly widespread. The darker countries are the countries where we have the sort of more intensive advisory support. China's a bit of a misnomer because it's handled a bit differently in China, but you can see where we have most support. It's quite obvious. This map isn't massively clear because you can't see some of the lighter countries, but we do have representation in the Nordic markets, in Kazakhstan, in all the Asia-Pacific markets. The markets where we don't offer help to companies tend to be the markets that you could probably guess we don't offer help to companies. So places like Iran and North Korea, very difficult to access markets where we don't get much demand anyway. There's very few inquiries from those markets. So, moving on to a bit more detail about the specific funding schemes and the specific services which UK Trade and Investment can offer to exporters. There are lots and lots of these, and in the grand scheme of the UK government, they all tend to have names that we abbreviate into things like P2E, G3, OMIS, etc., etc. I'm not going to talk through all of them, predominantly because they are different depending on where you're based. If you're in Yorkshire with us, some of these schemes will be slightly different to how they would be in London or wherever else your offices are based. A lot of them are only for small to medium-sized businesses as well, especially the funding. So for someone like you guys, you might not be able to access some of this support. We'll start off with passport to export because it's usually where we start. If a company comes to UKTI and doesn't currently export anything, passport is usually the best option for them. It's a 12-month-long intensive program of support where you work with an international trade advisor to develop your business, develop your strategy. You draw up an action plan of around 12 activities usually and progress that forward then together. I think the last passport company I worked with on an action plan, we drew up around 10 activities. About 5 were things I was going to do, so I'm going to find out this about this market, do this research into this market for you, and then the other 5 would be things that the client's going to do. So I'm going to develop my website, I'm going to go to this event, and we're going to work together until at the end of those 12 months, hopefully we have some sales going into overseas markets. Passport also carries some funding with it. As I said, in Yorkshire, if you register for passport, there's £1,000 of match funding available to help you implement the actions on the action plan as well. But that may be different in London or wherever you guys are based. I'll also talk in a bit more detail about the Overseas Market Introduction Service and the Export Marketing Research Scheme as well. They both have very snappy, catchy names. When we talk about OMIS, the Overseas Market Introductory Service, I mentioned that we have posts who work overseas, so we have this large network of UKTI staff working in overseas markets. There's a certain amount of help they will give you free of charge for nothing. So if you went to them and said, I need to know some basics about the healthcare market in Spain, then we could come back to you with a quick report on Spain, where the opportunities are, where the growth sectors are going to be, the demographics, etc. But if you wanted to take that forward and then do a market research project into Spain to identify potential distributors, potential clients in Spain, that's something UKTI can do for you. That's something you have to pay for through something called the Overseas Market Introduction Service. We call OMIS, but it is heavily subsidised from market rate. So it works out at about £40 an hour you pay for them to conduct that research on your behalf. And it's all agreed up front. So you'd agree in advance that this is going to take 20 hours for me to find this list of distributors for you, arrange these meetings with government officials for you, whatever it is you need them to do. And we can do that in any of the markets covered on this map. I'll quickly mention EMRS as well before we move on to some other things. So the Export Marketing Research Scheme is currently the scheme that has the highest grant that UKTI offers from a funding perspective. So if you'd been through the first stage of Passport and you'd identified some markets that you wanted to target, but you didn't really know anything about them, other than you'd looked at it, you'd seen it had a demographic profile that worked for you, had a GDP and a healthcare expenditure that worked for you. What do? We have our products, but do we need to change our products? What price can we enter them at? Who are the main distributors? How does the healthcare system work? You need to do some more market research into that market to really form a proper market entry plan. The EMRS scheme is incredibly useful for helping you with that. It's run by a team of specialist market research advisors. So we would put you in touch with EMRS who can help you with that. And they can offer you grants of up to £5,000 to help with that research. So if you need to buy a report, then there's a grant available. If you need to go and do a market visit, spend a month in market, just meeting people, researching, talking to occupational therapists, whatever it would be, then they can help support that as well. It's all done on a match-funded basis. So if you spend £5,000 on something, then you can claim £2,500 back. And I'll also talk a bit more about our events and trade show access program initiatives as well. So because we're at an exhibition, it seems to make most sense to talk about exhibitions as well. I'm sure some of you will have been to exhibitions overseas in the past. The way that UKTI administers its presence at overseas trade missions is a bit confusing. So I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I can. An ATO is an accredited trade organisation, and an accredited trade organisation would manage the group of UK companies at an overseas show on behalf of UKTI. So in this sector, there's about 3 or 4 ATOs. The main ones you'd see would be the Association of British Healthcare Industries, the ABHI, Medilink, and Gambika, who specialise in the lab sector, the lab and instrumentation sector. And you look around the world and you see these big trade shows. Most of them have a group of UK companies who go and exhibit together on what we call a UK pavilion, which looks a bit like that. That's the UK pavilion from RehaCare last year. If you exhibit on one of these stands, then you are eligible. You can apply for a TAP grant, which stands for Trade Show Access Programme. All of these grants get approved by UKTI, but they are administered by the ATO. That's the slightly confusing bit, because you'd be applying to, say, the ABHI for this grant, but then it actually gets funneled through to UKTI, who approve the grant, come back to the ABHI, who then give you the money after the show. So it's a little bit confusing. TAP funding is quite easy to explain. It's a grant to help you attend an overseas exhibition. There's different rates of funding for different shows. So if you go to a show in Europe, the grant's £1,500. If you do a show in a high-growth, more distant market like China or Saudi Arabia, then the grant's £3,000. And there's a sliding scale in between. The States, you get about £2,000 for doing a show in the States. But you can only get this funding at a show where someone is running a UK pavilion. So for you guys in this sector, I think RehaCare would be the most relevant show, because it's the most similar one to here in terms of a product profile and a client profile, delegate profile. These are all the healthcare shows we do that I thought could be relevant. So we have Arab Health, which is a very big show in the UAE. That's in January. That's very much seen as a growing, successful show in a growing market, very popular exhibition. The Chinese Medical Equipment Fair, which is in China, that's moving to Shanghai next year. We have several shows in May, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, South Africa, again, all in high-growth emerging markets, all big shows. Then Medical Fair Asia, Medica, which is the biggest show by quite some significant distance. That's in Dusseldorf, but that's a general medical technology show. And then we have RehaCare, which is the most similar show to Naidex. It's also in Dusseldorf. It's in September or October. It alternates throughout the years. And it's the world's largest rehabilitation and assistive technology focused exhibition. So it's very significantly larger than Naidex. It's probably about 5 or 6 times the size of Naidex. It's much bigger than this show. And it happens every year, and the UK is actually very well represented at RehaCare. I think we have the second largest group of companies after Germany representing us at that show. So we have 41 companies in total last year. We had about 20 exhibiting on the UK Pavilion group, and obviously the other 21 wanted bigger stands, like some of these stands around here, and you can't really accommodate those in the UK Pavilion, so they tend to be people who exhibit themselves independently, like I guess Sunrise do, to be honest. There's TAP grants of £1,500 available to companies exhibiting there. It's organised by some people called Medilink. If you want any more information on RehaCare, then I can give that to you after the presentation. But the key thing as an international trade advisor that I'd encourage people to think about is, if you want to meet a whole load of international agents, international distributors, and you see that as being the way of growing your product, growing your company, then RehaCare is a very, very cost-effective way of doing that. It's a global show. You get people coming in from all over the world, and by paying for a stand there, you can meet loads and loads of people that you wouldn't get to otherwise meet. So it's a very, very cost-effective way of doing it. You will find that international shows are more expensive than shows in the UK, not just because you have to travel there, etc., because the stand space is just more expensive. There's no two ways around that. They just are more expensive. But it is the best place you can go to meet a large group of people globally. If you decided, for whatever reason, that you had other specific markets that were of interest, for example, if you'd identified really big opportunities for you in the Asia-Pacific region, then maybe Medical Fair Asia would be a more reasonable show. I don't know what those opportunities would be. We'd have to work through that in a program together. And that was the end of me, really. I hope that all made sense, talking about UKTI and what we can do to help. But in particular, I think RehaCare would be an interesting initiative for you guys to at least visit if you've not been before and get a grip of what's going on. It's only in Dusseldorf, so it's really easy to visit RehaCare. And yeah, if you want to be put in touch with your regional international trade advisor, like I said, I'm the person for Yorkshire. In other regions, we have other people who do that job, and I'm more than happy to put you in touch with the right people for you.